all this stuff is part of the reason why I've been a nighttime programmer. This is all the interstation politics and stuff was something that turned me off over the years, and I didn't. I did have a daytime show from '89 to '96, and I would have lost that music show when under under Brian Mann's dictatorship, except for the fact that Kay at that time, Kay Benetti, which is Kay, back to her original. She was very involved with the station for a number of years. I don't know if she's on the list of people to interview, but she's still in town. But anyway, she was on the board of directors at that time, and she insisted. She told him, "No, you're not getting Lee Ruth off the air off the daytime air. You know, he's too much a part of." I don't know. I guess they thought my mostly folk programming was a good fit for Thursday morning, 9 to 11:40 or 11:50. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't lose my show at that time, and Steve Spencer ended up. I did lose it when he came along, because he turned us into a daytime talk thing. They actually declared the station dead at some point, and had an all-station meeting, and said, in which they had somebody, I don't know what they call it. What do you call it when somebody's hosting a show or a discussion or something like that, or a meeting? There's a name for that. One of the station, people was in charge of that, and the first thing we were told is, we are not here to talk about KOPN. We are here to talk about KOPN is no more. We are here to talk about the only thing of value that we actually have here, which is this frequency that we have the rights to, and what we're trying to do, what we're here to do tonight is to discuss how we might put this frequency in the hands of somebody that would do a good thing with it. One of the things that was happening is as what do you call it, the end of the dial we're around, there's a name for that. And there was a word or a phrase for, we had all the community stations, and the public stations were mostly all in the, between 91 and between 88.1 and 91 point something. And these frequencies were being purchased by wealthy right-wing industrialists and capitalists, and who turned them into propaganda stations, for right-wing propaganda. And so the idea was to try to get KOPN in the hands of somebody that wasn't going to be doing that. And at that, KBIA eventually did get their second channel so that they could do classical music round the clock and still do their NPR connected programming too. But at that time there was a possibility that KBIA would have been interested in our frequency, so they could set up their dual programming thing. So I don't know, somewhere near the end of that meeting, somebody stood up and said, "This is a whole bunch of bullshit. I don't agree that KOPN's dead." And all of us who'd been sitting silent said, "Amen." Yeah, we jumped on it. So there were so many people that were against the idea of declaring KOPN dead. What had happened under Steve Spencer is that we had gone from $56,000 in debt to $112,000. It doubled our debt in 12 months. And I guess one of these loans was due, borrowed money or not paid for programming from Pacifica and various other places that we were buying programming from. So anyway, what ended up happening is that another meeting was scheduled at a larger location than the one that was down on, which is what is no longer, but now part of the courthouse area there, down on A Street. There was kind of a room that had you could put 40 or 50 chairs in it. North A Street. So anyway, we had a meeting there, and instead of having 30 or 40 people, there were 100, 120 people there. And before the meeting was over, they had 10 or 12 different committees set up to deal with all different aspects of what it was going to take to keep KOPN on the air. And no, for a while, no actually paid employees. We had the several people. Somebody from there was a team of 2 or 3 people that were taking care of the management in the office and all on a volunteer basis, and splitting up the time each week that needed to be done, and the entire board of directors was changed over, and they got up some people that had money connections in town to be part of the board of directors to help with the fundraising and work out a deal with the bank so that we could get an extension on paying the loan. I think the bank president was part of the board of directors for a while after that. And we had, Chris Kelly was on the board of directors, and didn't take him but about 2 meetings to be in charge of the thing. And he was a master of parliamentary procedure and how to get what he wanted out of a group of people. For about 3 years I was in town every month when they had on the evening that they had the board meeting. I started sitting on the board meeting just I wanted to know what they were doing, because there was nobody on the board at that time that had there was no institutional memory that remembered how things were done and what the issues had been in the past or anything like that. So I just wanted to be somebody who could interject. I wasn't really interested in being on the board. I didn't even care if I had a vote, but so anyway, I lost my daytime program in '96 when Steve Spencer turned us into a talk radio daytime thing, competing with KBIA, and we stayed with quite some of that after. Anyway, that hasn't got much to do with how I got connected to KOPN. That's just something that happened in the middle of, halfway through. If we were looking at it now from 73 to 96, that's 23 years. It's been 26 years now since then. And we've had a couple other, sort of emergencies, but nothing that seemed as severe as that one was.
So were you at all connected with the New Wave Corporation back in the early 70s?
I was, they had their first meetings about the station. It must have been sometime in 1991. We went on the air in 93. What? 71, I mean, yeah, 71. And there was at that time there was a little alternative, you call it underground newspaper in town. There was a weekly thing. It's called The Issue, and their office was on something within this block here on 10th Street, between Broadway and north of Broadway. In some building there, they had a little office space there where they put together this paper. And the first meetings for organizing the station were in the offices of The Issue, and I heard about them, but I wasn't one of the people. I had never even heard of community radio, and there's probably a reason for that, because there were only 3 or 4 community radio stations in the entire country. And I think 2, one in San Francisco, one in LA, one in New York, and one in Houston. And so some people knew about that, but there was a new idea. So Jeff Mintz, who was one of the people that was in one of the early on organizers, creators of the station, I'd become a friend of his, because he'd been on commercial radio in Columbia in the late 60s, when the best of the music in the, I don't know what you call it, out of the rock and roll pop music world was not the hits, but was other artists, who were, maybe they were eventually going to become stars, but they hadn't. There was, alternatives to top 40 radio. And so one of the stations in Columbia did an experiment with that, and Jeff Mintz was, who I think was Jethro, something like that, on the air was his handle. His on the air handle was doing an alternative pop rock and roll show where he might play things that were hits, but he was playing all the stuff that wasn't hits, and all the up and coming. It was mostly rock and pop, but there was, the lines weren't sharply drawn between one genre and another in terms of what he was playing. And then after a year or two, they canceled and went to a more conventional pop music format, and so he was out of a job there. That's probably, anyway, some people knew about, so anyway, he was one of the people. And so the only way they were going to be able to do music programming, we didn't have a music library here, was getting people to do shows who had their own personal music collections. And I had maybe 1,000 LPs and 1,000 45s in my collection, most of them dating from between 1955 and the early 70s. It was from the early rock and roll days to, and my collection had everything from what I considered the best of the country music of that time, blues, rhythm and blues. My own collection was very eclectic, and a lot of what I had was stuff that was not hits. It was the regional artists here and there and everywhere around the country who had maybe had hits that were hits in a certain part of Texas or something like that. So anyway, I got drafted to do a music show because I had a music collection and was knowledgeable about it. So I was because I had my collection was at home, it made more sense for me to put together the shows at home. So, and I had a semi-decent reel-to-reel tape recorder, a pretty decent one. So I would make my shows at home from my collection of 45s and LPs, and live music that I'd recorded at that time. Cassettes hadn't really come into play. Were just coming on, and they'd mostly been used for things other than music. They weren't high fidelity until sometime in the 70s. So I would record them on a reel-to-reel tape, and, almost exactly an hour, and I'd bring it into the station each week and hand it off to the people, whoever was doing the board, for Sunday evening, 8 to 9.
What year did that start?
We went on the air in March of 1973, and March 3rd might have been the date. But anyway, the first Sunday that we were on the air, I had a show recorded. So I had a show during that first week. And we were only daylight till maybe 11 or midnight. We weren't a 24-hour station. We were only 10 watts. So you couldn't hear us more than 3 or 4 miles away from downtown, I think, something like that. I was on the north side of town, and I could pick up KOPN, but not wasn't real strong. I was 2 miles from downtown, and on the side of a hill that was facing the other way. So it must have been 74 that we went. 74 to 75 that we went to 40,000 watts and 24-hour programming. And it was, the station didn't cost much to operate when it was 10 watts and almost entirely volunteer run. I don't know if there was anybody paid. Might have had an engineer on contract or something to be able to take care of the equipment. But KOPN was successful within our 4-mile or 6-mile diameter of the circle that we reached. I think we actually might have broadcast from the top of Paquin Towers. At that time, we didn't have that ended up being a relay station to relay it out to the transmitter out on Route Z. But so anyway, we went 24 hours, and I was and that's when I had I had been married in the 60s, and had 2 kids, married in 64 and divorced in 69, and so between 1969 and 1980, I was essentially in between wives, and I was thrown into the streets of Columbia as a place to hang out and play music and listen to music and be part of the alternative community. You could call it hippie, but that's not real accurate, because it was quite a range of people that were part of that scene. And so I would be out every evening somewhere, hanging out someplace, playing music, or in good weather playing on the street, or playing down. The journalism school of arts has great acoustics. We'd go sit down there and play from 1 to 4 in the morning or something like that. And people would walk through every once in a while, and occasionally somebody'd stop and listen for a while. So anyway, most everything that was going on would end by the bars closed at 1:30. So somewhere between 1 and 2 o'clock, I'd be home, and that was my time to work on my own, archives, my own music collection, and work on my own, editing my own reel-to-reel recordings and recording things myself and practicing, learning new songs to add to my repertoire. And so anyway, starting in whenever it was that we went 24 hours, I'm just thinking, probably sometime in 74 or 75, I started listening to KOPN. I don't think I even had a tuner as part of my stereo system in my little basement apartment in the north side of town. So I started listening to KOPN, and it was so good and so interesting. Our all night programming. I think the show was called All Night Images or something like that. And each of the nights of the week, a different host took it from midnight to 6 in the morning or something like that. And then we had, that's when we started doing classical music from 6 to 9 or 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 in the morning. So somebody would take it from midnight to 6. And so it was a virtually uninterrupted flow of programming. You know, not much happening, but okay, you know, station IDs. People, and there were some really good programmers that doing these different nights of the week. Music, and sometimes there'd be a virtually uninterrupted flow of music from midnight to 6 in the morning. Some people were playing various kinds of talk recordings, you know, lectures and talks by various people who were interesting. It could have been Ram Dass or somebody like that, an hour or 2 hour tape of him or everything like that. And I just got sucked into KOPN midnight, you know, all night images late, and it was completely ruining my own musical time for me to be working on my own music. And so I finally ended up having to ration myself on it. If I wanted to keep considering myself a working musician, I had to, so I hadn't really thought about, I was still doing my recorded show, but by 1975 or getting towards 76, I'd gone through quite a bit, the best of my own personal collection, every different kind, you know, different kinds of music, folk music, country music, things from out of the jazz world, guitar music of different kinds, and and live music that I had recordings of local people. Sometimes the recordings weren't very good quality, but I played them anyway on the air. They were what would be called arable, but they were still good. They were good events, you know, musical events, and they were worth casting an ear to. So I'd thought about, if I did get a show, it would need to be late at night. And somewhere during that period of time, KOPN, KBIA had a program, University of Missouri as part of their programming, as part of their journalism school had a broadcast, you know, option, you know, where you could be learning radio, things about radio, and you could be also, or television. And the KBIA was their student, you know, hands-on project, and Channel 8, KOMU, was the TV thing. So they had hands-on places for students to learn their broadcast skills, I guess you could say, you know, radio and television skills. So to do anything on the air in those days, you had to have an FCC license, a third-class license. And the only place you had to pass a test to get it. And I think St. Louis, it was either St. Louis or Kansas City was where he had to go to get it. and there was a book that you would have to study that had the information in it so you could pass the test. But anyway, KOPN and KBIA and the journalism school teamed up and set up a thing where the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, would send a little team of people to Columbia to do a morning class, a 3-hour class where they would teach you everything that you needed to know to take the test, and then they would give the test in Columbia, and you could have your third class license immediately if you passed the test, all on the same day. And so there were, so somebody at KOPN made sure that 20 or 30 or 40 people from KOPN who didn't have third class licenses, you could do things on the air, but you could not be the only one at the station. There had to be somebody on the premises with a third class license for anybody to be on the air. So I took part in that and passed the test, and as did almost everybody else. And so we had at that point we had 20 or 30 or 40 more people that had third class licenses, and of course 3/4 of the people that were at that thing. It was a pretty the auditorium that they had over there at the J School at that time. There's a name for it, but I don't remember what it is. Was pretty full. There were an awful lot of people that were actually there over there. I still have in my wallet that same third class license that I got in 1973 or 74, whenever it was. I'll bet you there's a date on it. That'll tell me, answer several questions that I have posed to myself here. It's probably back here somewhere. There's a Medicare Advantage Plan card. There's my Medicare card. Here's my picture of my son Andrew when he was about 6 years old. He's 34 now, or will soon be 34. Here it is, February 11th, 1983. That's when I got this third class license. It's worth looking at. It's pretty threadbare. I don't know, at some point you didn't have to have that anymore.
This is a historical artifact. Should be laminated, don't you think?
Well, it's been in my wallet this long. I think at the point of time when it actually disintegrates, it will have lived its proper life. I don't know who would want it. What else is in there? Voter registration is probably, or voter ID is probably 10 years old though. I should clean out my wallet.
That's why we invited you here today.
Well, I still got this license in here. I've never had to show it to anybody.
So you started your nighttime program in the 70s?
Spring of '76. So anyway, we'd been on the air for a few years, and we'd been in 24 hours for a couple of years at that point in time. And in 1972, we was backtracking over a couple of years here, before KOPN was on the air, there was some really good music in town. A really good concert at the Jesse Auditorium, and it was the Gary Burton Quartet. It was a jazz quartet, and he was a vibes player. He played the vibraphones, and he was, I think, the first person to do this thing with four mallets, 2 in each hand. And he was young at that time. He was probably in his early 20s by that time. He was kind of the boy wonder of the. He'd come out of Indiana and then to Nashville, Tennessee. And then he got in with the Nashville jazz players who were country musicians, but they liked jazz, and so they would jam in Nashville. And so he became a part of that. And in the late 60s, there was a Newport Jazz Festival that had been going for decades. And in 1968 or 69, Chet Atkins took a bunch of Nashville jazz players to Newport, Rhode Island for the Newport Jazz Festival, and there was some kind of riot at the Newport Jazz Festival that year, and so Chet Atkins hand-picked crew which included Gary Burton, probably still a teenager on vibes, ended up not being able to do the concert that they were scheduled to do. So they found some place somewhere to play in Newport, and this was called and they had to recorded an album that came out on RCA. Chet was the head of the RCA studios in Nashville at that time. And so it was, they basically put an album out called After the Riots at Newport was the name of their album, and they recorded it in some venue in Newport, Rhode Island. And so anyway, Gary Burton became pretty much a star in the jazz world coming up, young musicians coming up. And he put together a quartet, and he played a concert at Jesse Auditorium must have been late winter towards early spring of '72. Would have been about February or March or something like that. And as was my wont in those days, I guess I can make this confession and not worry about I took a hit of acid and I drove downtown and went to Jesse Auditorium and got there about the time that it was coming on and saw this wonderful concert. It was great. It was a great concert. And then I left there, and then I decided I was still on the musical high plus the psychedelic high. I decided to go over to the Shea Coffee House and see what was going on that night, and so I walked over to the Shea, and there was a little three-piece band playing on the stage there with some people I'd never seen before, and they called themselves the Albert Kinchlow Band. And it turns out Albert Kinchlow was a fictional character. It was two guys, so it ended up being, there were two guitars, a lead guitar, and the leader of the group was a tall, skinny guy that played rhythm guitar on it. I think it might even been a nylon string guitar. And a bass player who was playing an electric bass, and the singer, the lead singer's brother was the lead guitar player playing electric guitar, and his heroes were Jimi Hendrix and various other heavy metal. So this was a strange combination and the singer, Larry McLean, was a songwriter. And he had written a whole body of. He was 3 years out of high school. He was class of '69, Liberty, Missouri, and he'd been writing songs since before he was out of high school, I think. And he had a whole bunch of songs that he'd written, and some of them were ballads and pretty songs, and some of them were really funny, and some of them were kind of hard rock things. So anyway. I went over to the Shea Coffee House, and here's these guys that I'd never seen before that were obviously 10 or more years younger than I was. That were, I was at that time, I was 31 during that period of time, and they were in their, they were probably 19 to 22 in age, and they had great songs, and they didn't sound like anybody else. The songs were smart and politically alive and funny, and musically interesting, and well played and well performed. And so I heard them, and one of the songs that Larry McLean played, that wasn't the Albert Kinslow band played, was a song that Larry McLean had written about, the name of the song was Radio Omega. And the song was about a radio show in the future. The song was a vision of the future, a radio station called Radio Omega. And this was at a time and when the world was at peace. The human race was no longer warring with humans at war with each other. And so I heard that song and I thought, Radio Omega. Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. So that's so I thought, so it was kind of like the last radio station, And so I thought, well, if I ever had a late night radio show, and this was before KOPN was even on the air, if I ever had a late night radio show, I would call it Radio Omega, and I would my point of departure would be that song, and the music that related to it. And so 4 years later, I had a chance to get a late night show, and I had learned that song. And even though this was sort of a rock band, they were kind of a tiny heavy metal band or something like that, without being overpowering with 6-foot tall amplifiers and such. So then they ended up coming back to Columbia on numerous occasions in different combinations. And then later he put together some kind of band, and he ended up moving to Colorado and being based out of there for a few years. Kansas City wasn't big enough to hold them, I guess. So anyway, I learned that song, and that had been the plan. I thought I would, if I ever had a radio show, a late night radio show, I would call it Radio Omega, the last radio show. I would sing that song as either an opening or a closing theme or both. The last line of the song was, "This is Radio Omega signing off." So I had a show that was the last, even though it was at that time it was instead of Wednesday, it was Tuesday morning, well, Monday night, Tuesday morning, instead of Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. No, it was Wednesday night, Thursday morning is when I was doing it, but I always thought of it as Wednesday night. And because it was the last show of the previous, it was, and the show that came on after mine was a classical music, and that was the beginning. It was really the beginning of KOPN's new broadcast day. That's probably when we'd gone on the air before we went 24 hours. We went on the air at 6 in the morning and stayed. So Radio Omega was a perfect name for it, and I would sing that song at the end of the show. And
so do we have?
I'm still doing that.
Do we have a chance to hear you sing it now, or are we going to insert a clip?
Well, I could I could get my guitar out of the case. I've had this guitar since December of 1963. And it was 5 years old when I got it, but it was already beat up. Even though it was only, people get a Martin guitar, and sometimes you see a Martin that's 30 years old that's been played a lot, that's still shiny, but this was already scuffed up. All the scuffing here and here had already been done before I got it. And I got it at a pawn shop in Columbia in December of 1963. I'm not quite in tune.
where it touches the, we don't want it to,
Oh,
there you
I
go.
see. I got you.
Oh, I don't think, I'll lean forward. It's better for me to do that anyway than try to sit and then say with the arms and get above it, you know. And that would put it too high if I had the towel. So anyway, for better or worse, in the middle of the day, use Radio Omega. Catch your breath on Ellis Island, gem of oceans like they said. Place your tooth beneath your pillow, nod your head. Learn the teacher talks of dungeons, crabby kings and hellish reigns. Centuries ago they jousted in aeroplanes. Willie Mays just hit a homer for the millionth time, I'm told, and he's not the slave of green things that you fold. Settle down, space-weary children, you've had far too much of pain. This is Radio Omega, signing off. This is Radio Omega, signing off. Happy trails to you. And good morning too. I added that last little "and good morning" too because I was using it as a radio station sign off, or show sign off anyway. Well, this could go away,
Wonderful.
and
Those fingers are
I still
still,
love it. I still like that song.
yeah, your fingers are working great.
Well, that's a song that I've been playing every week, even though despite the COVID-19, well, after maybe 3 or 6 months that I wasn't doing a show. So that's, but I've been in the process now of relearning my own repertoire, and I've been trying to every night at some point in time sit down and just start playing songs and keep playing them. In case I actually ever have an opportunity to play somewhere again, I need to drink water again.
So Radio Omega is still on the air.
Yeah.
So would you be one of the longest running programmers on KOPN?
Well, I don't know if there's anybody else still doing programming here that was doing programming when we went on the air in '73. It may be that there's not, but I think there's still, from '76, there's still some people around here that maybe weren't on the air in '73, but were in '76. I think. Pretty sure Carol Goodnick was on the air by then, or soon. Actually, she was soon to be on the air because The original Irish show was Jake Schumacher, who was a great music programmer, regardless of what genre he was playing. You know. Jeff Mintz also was a great programmer, music programmer.
So when did you start having some live people drop in on your Radio Omega show?
Almost immediately.
Well, tell us some of your guests. I know Jack Williams was one of them, but who else?
Well,
tell us about Jack.
Well, let's keep the local musicians.
Good.
Jack was an occasional local. You know, he'd hung out here enough to be part of the local scene when he was here. I would say the first, you know, I'd probably been doing my show no more than a month or two before I had Jerome Wheeler and Steve Hutchison come up, and we did and the three of us did it. We just a show and played it. You know, basically the whole show was doing live music from 3 o'clock until close to near the end. You know, I could always cut to a recorded thing or something if I needed to, but so. And I recorded all of those too. So I have the recording, reel-to-reel tape. We were set up to be able to record on reel-to-reel tapes while we were on the air. So we could record shows that way. I don't know if we had cassette access and whether I used my own. I think the machines we had were not quarter track. I think they were half track. And I don't know if so I might have brought my own reel-to-reel deck up, and because I was recording at 3 3/4. I couldn't afford to buy all the tape I wanted that I needed to record what I wanted to record and record at 7.5 inches per second so I recorded them probably at 3 3/4 inches per second and on quarter track tapes. Can't even remember what machines I was using, but that way you get 90 minutes on a side. So a 3-hour radio show, 180 minutes. It was just about perfect. I could record it and then flip the tape halfway through it and record the other half of the show. So Jerome Wheeler remained a fixture on the Columbia music scene until he passed away in 2003. And then for about the next 10 years, or 2005 was when he died. It was not 2000. For about the next 8 or 10 years, we did a festival every June called the Jerome Fest. There would be some local venue where friends of Jerome or fans of Jerome would all get together and play a bunch of songs, not necessarily Jerome songs, but we would tell Jerome stories. And so those were two of the locals that were the most regular ones to get up on my show, and Jack Williams was a musician who lived in a number of different places because his dad had been in the Army, I think, or Air Force, and he'd been stationed. But he spent some of his young years in Georgia and North Carolina or South Carolina, and also up in Washington State, somewhere up in the Seattle area. He spent time up there. But he was based out of, at the time that I met him, he rode into Columbia in the spring of 1971 with a young musical friend of his who was in the process of learning to play, but who was, I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, and I think it was Jack's first trip west of the Mississippi to venture out and with his own musical expertise and his, musical playing. At that time he was playing almost entirely electric guitar and putting together rock and roll bands, to play. There's kind of southern rock, you could call it. And Jack was a very skilled guitar. Anyway, he rode into town, and it turned out to be the same day. There's a thing that's been happening that for the last 20 or 30 years has been happening every spring in what used to be McAllister Park, and they call it Peace Park now. So it's Earth Day, the Earth Day thing. But before that, it was something. There was a one-day thing that they called a Renaissance Fair, and it was just a little one-day festival. And it was in the spring, and it was in McAllister Park and then Peace Park after 1971. And there would be live music, and a lot of stuff there is at Earth Day, but it was more of just a counterculture, social and musical gathering, and so Jack rolled into town, and somebody steered him to that event, and told him, Jack was looking for somebody. He was looking to start a band, and he was looking for a drummer possibly. And so he was told to look for Bummer the drummer, whose actual name is Glenn Ward, who was from Fayette, Missouri, but he'd been playing in Columbia bands for several years at that time. And he was a very good drummer and a good singer, and ended up writing some good songs. Great musician and an interesting guy. So anyway, Jack rolled into town, and he just hit it just the right day, and made friends with a whole section, number of people in the Columbia musical, and he ended up sticking around town for a couple weeks, I think, before he moved on and traveled on from there, and even ended up marrying a woman from Columbia that he met here. Maybe even met her during that first time he was in town. I don't know. They weren't married immediately. So anyway, Jack continued to put together a band with several Columbia musicians in it, and they went on the road, and they lived in different places, but they lived in Colorado for a couple of years, and they traveled around, and Jack would come. So Jack's been a road musician, a serious road warrior musician since before I met him, since before 1971. He was probably doing the same kind of thing on the eastern part of the country, southeast, American southeast. And so anyway, time he was traveling through from, he would stop in Columbia. Columbia became a regular stop for him, and he continued to play music. He was ready to play all night, any night and every night, and so there were some other Columbia musicians who were like me, who were ready to play if there was somebody to play with. Find someplace, somebody's front porch or living room or kitchen or dining room or wherever, or outside if the weather was nice.
Or KOPN.
Well, yeah. Well, then starting when I had a show, it was '76, but this is and then so anyway, when Jack came through town, I'd have him on my show, and sometimes we had a bunch of other people play too. Sometimes it was just Jack, but sometimes it was Jack and two or three other friends. And totally unrehearsed. You know, we didn't really know where we were going to go and what would lead to what, or who would. We were just kind of swapping tunes, different. Jerome would play something, then Jack would play something, then I'd play something, and people would play along or not if they felt like they had something to play that would work with it. And we just record it all and we tell stories and tell jokes and just have a conversation and just generally have a great time. And
So what was the recording studio like in those days?
oh, it was just the air room. You know, there was.
Pretty much like it is now?
Well, it was set up similarly. You know, at certain times the air room was where the production room is now. The air room moved from there to. It was when we got a new board at some point in time. I think we moved over there, and then there was a time when we changed boards again that they moved the air room back into what's the production room now for a period of time, and then back to where it is. So that was where it was, and so I was set up. I think there were three microphones, and we didn't need to have everybody didn't have. Everybody would position themselves so that their instrument and their voice would be in balance. Everybody had headphones, so you could get so I would just kind of mix it as on the fly, you know. And if something seemed a little loud, then I could pop down one of the mics, or I'd have to say, Jack, move your mic up a little bit. You're catching more guitar and not quite enough vocal or something like that. So we just shifted around as the evening progressed, and so I've got many reels of tape of live music from KOPN. There's been bits and pieces of it that I've digitized and burned CDs of, but I don't know if I have enough time left in my life to be able to do justice to archiving it some way. And nobody else would know what it is. And so I couldn't just turn it over to some technicians and say, do this thing. No, besides, I need to hear it. I need to know what's going on. So some of it's indexed, some of it's cataloged. You know, I've made lists of what's on I've got a list of what's on most of the reels of tape. The ones I haven't, I had a project going a couple years ago where I was actually listening what's on them and indexing the actual songs that, you know, listening who was on what and what the recording was and a list of the songs and who played on them and what. All that information is written down in folded up pieces of paper inside each of the reel-to-reel 7-inch reel-to-reel boxes. Anyway, there's a lot of really good music. Some of the things we did things. I think the first time that Steve and Jerome came up with me, the thing that I liked the best of what we did that night is we set our guitars down and we sang for 3-part harmony. We sang The Long Black Veil, a real slow and mournful. 10 years ago on a cold dark night. Jerome was singing bass and I was singing the melody and Steve was singing a higher harmony. And it just came out. It still sounds haunting to me when I hear it. I have digitized that one song, I think, and put it on a.
Can we get a copy of that?
Somewhere I may have a recording that I don't know. All my digitized stuff is loose. I'm having trouble even remembering what I've got there and keeping track of it. You know. I'm set up to where I can digitize it and burn CDs from it, but I really need to. Some of the old reels recorded at 3 3/4 cents per second need a little EQ. They need to be boosted a little bit in the mids and the highs to make them a little brighter, sound a little better. So I've got an EQ that I can do it with, but that's a time-consuming project. It's not even real time. You have to do it in real time. You can't do it it's not like burning a CD from a digital source where you could do it at 48 or 52x, I don't think it's I think it's better to burn things music at a slower speed. I like 8 or 16 is my target for burning CDs with music.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
So, yesterday we talked to Dave Pera,
yeah.
and he talked about living at the Shea. And I remember you playing at the Shea. What was the interaction, if any, between the scene at the Shea and KOPN?
Well, the Shea was a coffee house that was set up by a man named Van. Why can't I think of his last name? Well, his first name was Van, who set this up as a place for college students to hang out. It had been open in previous times under a different name, but it hadn't been open for a year or two. And he was the youth minister at the church there, and he set this up, and it opened in it opened in the fall of 1964, I think is when it was. It was just opened. I'd been in Columbia moved to Columbia in '62, so I'd been in Columbia 2 years. So I went so I heard about the new coffee house in town. Check it out, and I'm going to check it out. So I went over there, and there were 2 guys playing that turned out to be Jerome Wheeler and Dan Peake, who were just out of high school the previous year. Dan was a year and a summer out of high school, and Jerome had good. And they'd put together a little string band in Versailles, Missouri, and gotten a job playing at the Lake of the Ozarks that summer for I can't even remember the name of the thing that had a country. It was Ozark Opry, that was right out of the recorded, and so the guy that was the head of that ran the Ozark Opry, that was part of the band and the host of the show, had set up a little smaller venue in the back of his parking lot there, and called it to cash in on the folk music scare or craze or whatever it was of the early to mid '60s. Hillbilly hootenanny is what he called it. And then he hired these 3 young guys just out of high school to be the band there. So they played there that summer. So Dan and Jerome ended up becoming. I met them the first time I went to the Shea Coffee House, and they were playing on what was the stage at that time, which was down by the fireplace. They ended up moving the stage some years later to be in front of the windows on the Hit Street side of it. So I met Dan. So anyway, it ended up not only being a coffee house, which was pretty much run by the students, but they had kitchen facilities, and they had a rooming facility. So they actually had full-time residents there who were students who lived there, and they were Shea keepers, and they had a schedule of working in the coffee house. So they were open pretty much 7 nights a week, but they only had official live music on weekends, Friday and Saturday nights. It was an open mic mostly, though they sometimes had live bands come in and play. They sometimes had live music that was paid. They would charge $1 at the door. It was free otherwise, but you charge $1 at the door, and if 40 or 50 people showed up, then whoever played got $40 or $50, you know. So, so, so Dave was one of the people that came to Columbia to go to school at the university, and had discovered the Shea Coffee House and started hanging out there, and ended up living there and being one of the residents of the Shea. And he met the woman that became his wife, Kathy Barton, at the Shea, and they ended up becoming musical partners, and then married. Musical partners until she passed away just a couple of years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, something like that now, I guess. So anyway, it wasn't a direct connection between the Shea and KOPN, but KOPN was looking for people to do shows and people to come up and do things, do live things on the air. And so Dave and Kathy and some other people. I knew Kathy because she had taken guitar banjo lessons from me over the late 60s to early 70s, before she was, when she was still going to school, still in high school, junior high or high school, I think. She had a couple of years of guitar and banjo, mostly banjo lessons from me. She ended up taking with it and running, became a much more skilled banjo player than I ever was or am. So anyway, so Dave and Kathy, and there were other people from the Shea that made the KOPN connection, and either played music up there on other people's shows or ended up getting shows that they did themselves. Dave did shows on a regular basis on KOPN. And sometimes had live music. He was involved with a regular live music show. There was maybe weekly. That ran for a few years. And so the connection was then the Shea was a place that was one place that things happened in Columbia, and the KOPN was another one, and they overlapped. The interests of the Shea people overlapped with the radio people, and the interest with the radio part of the community, community radio part of the community, was interested in music, and the live music from different venues in town and different musicians in town. So the Shea was a place that I can't say I ever hung out there on a regular basis because I was older. By 1964 I was married, and the Shea opened in '64, and then I had come '65 I had a daughter, and then '68 I had another daughter. And so and also I was going to school. I was in and out of school from '62 to '68, and finally got enough. Took me 9 years from high school to a bachelor's degree. But I finally, in '68, spring of '68, I finally got enough credits that meshed to make a degree out of something. And then in '69, 68, '69, that winter, my wife and I split up. First wife and I split up, and then we got a divorce, and I guess winter, January, February, somewhere around February of '69 or February, March of '69, something like that. And so that put me back. So that from that point on, the Shea was more of a regular place for me to go. I had, during the time I was going to school and married, I was just just too much to do. Last year I was in school, I was working full time, 56 hours a week, 7 nights a week as a night desk clerk and in the cheesiest old hotel in Columbia, which was called the Menbolt Hotel. It was downtown. I was a night desk clerk at the Menbolt for about a year and a half. Our cheapest room was $275 a night. The most expensive room was $450. And so anyway, so I was working 56 hours a week. I was teaching guitar at Shaw Music, and had 40 students a week, which is 20 hours. They were half hourly. So I had 40. So I was working about 80 hours, 75 to 80 hours a week. Going to school full time. Still trying to maintain the illusion of being a working, performing musician, and somehow still in being a father and a husband and a family, and it all kind of disintegrated that winter after I graduated. Couldn't hold it all together. I was beyond my capabilities. And so I ended up. So anyway, the Shea and KOPN were partners in various events, and there were people that were involved with both, KOPN and with the Shea. And,
when did Michael Cochran come along, and did he ever play with you in your Radio Omega show?
Michael, no, I don't think he ever did. Well,
Because he was part of Sound Farm, right?
well, but that was a band that existed from 1968, and then kind of hit and miss up through sometime in 1972, and then they ceased to exist. But they started a whole bunch of musical lives going in Columbia. I met Michael when I came to town in Columbia and started at the university. We sat next to each other in a very interesting class that we both had. He was just out of high school, and I was 3 years out of high school, but I was going back to school after going to college a year and then working for a couple of years in Kansas City. Moved to Columbia, went back to school, and sat next to him in Astronomy 1, and, which was a class taught by a teacher who taught there in Columbia only by 1 year. His name was William Hughes, and he was an astronomy graduate from Harvard, is where he had gone to college, and he was a very interesting guy and a very interesting class. So anyway, so Mike and I talked, and a month or 6 weeks into the school year, we discovered we both played guitar, and so we decided, and we both were, I'd been playing mostly been come out of the rockabilly scene, playing rock bands, and Mike had done a little of that, but he'd been more of a country guitarist. Mike and his two brothers were personal friends of Chet Atkins, who lived in Nashville, which isn't all that far from West Plains, Missouri. And so anyway, so Mike knew I was a fan of Chet's, and Mike was an acquaintance of Chet's, and Mike knew how to play a bunch of Chet's songs, quite like Chet. Probably not as, he played them well, but nobody plays Chet as well as Chet. Though Chet would probably say, he would have said, well, he plays it better than I do it. There were some people, Chet was great at finding really good musicians and giving them a chance to record and to perform and to become more than just up and coming musicians. He helped a lot of people's careers along the way when they were starting out. So we got together and we played and we talked and we continued to be friends. He was living in a dorm and I was living at that time. I moved to Columbia with my parents, and I was living in the basement of my parents' house in a room that I'd set up there underneath the garage. We called it the cave because it was completely concrete with a door into it. Probably built to be a bomb shelter, actually, a concrete bunker underneath the garage of the house. So it was pretty soundproof, good place for me to be with my own home studio. But so anyway, Mike and I became, good friends, starting right away, and stayed in contact. And we different things. We played together here and there, and doing different things at different times. He had, there was a period of time when he had a band in Columbia and I had a band in Columbia. I was still playing in rock bands right up and various kinds of bands right up until 1968 or so. At the time that I moved to Columbia, I was looking for a band to play in, which I did find a band second semester at my university somewhere around January of '63. Somebody that I knew connected me up with some musicians. I ended up playing in a band that led to another band. But during this period of time, I was also trying to, this thing of playing songs and singing them myself was not something that came easy to me. I had the guitar playing was way ahead of the singing and playing, and so I was in the process of trying to get that thing together to where it was good enough that I was willing for other people to hear me. I was pretty much in the closet with the pick guitar and sing songs thing until the fall of '63 is when I came out of the closet. I spent that summer in Oregon and I had a lot of chance on a lookout, had a lot of chance to play my guitar that summer and sing songs. So anyway, a lot of this isn't supposed to be about KOPN, but a lot of this hasn't been. So,
yeah, I thought Michael probably came up, but he didn't. So
well, what ended up happening is I became involved with KOPN. Michael actually had a job on commercial radio in Columbia. What's the station that broadcast, the AM station that?
KFRU.
Yeah, he was on KFRU for a number of years, from the mid-60s to the mid-70s, 75 through 78 or something, whenever he moved back down to West Plains. So he moved out of Columbia, late 70s probably, and down to help his brother publish a magazine.
So are there some other folks that you had up?
Yeah, well, different people at different times, but I didn't have a vast variety. First, you got to find people that are willing to come up and play at 3 in the morning.
Right.
On the radio, and so most people most of the people I knew wouldn't fit that. And so Michael and I played together off and on. We played a few gigs together as Lee and Michael and Lee in 1977. We did those. Three times we played out at the Gladstone. But anyway, we'd played things together, and we'd rehearsed songs together and things. We would just stayed in contact, and we actually played some songs together and recorded those gigs that we played. And both of us were pretty pleased with the way the recordings came out, even though they're not great audio-wise. You can hear everything. You can hear the voices and the guitar parts and all the dialogue and all. So anyway, he was doing other things. Also, he had been married. He got married about the time I got divorced. And then he got married again. He and his first wife split up, and then he got married again. And in the mid to late 70s, he was married. He had married again, and married when he moved back down to the West Plains. And so he had his own life, and I had my own life, and we got together and did musical things. And then he moved away, and we didn't see each other a whole lot but we stayed in contact. Anytime I was heading down through West Plains, a couple times I stopped to visit him, and we were heading down to Arkansas or something, down 63. So we stayed in contact and ended up being involved in various projects and that he'd come back up for, and
well, back to KOPN, you've been here 50 years doing programming.
well,
What kind of changes? Well, close to 50 years.
we're going to have our 50th anniversary on the air next year
Yeah.
in March.
What kind of changes have you noticed?
Well, from being a 10-watt station, almost a hobby radio station, to being a full-time, non-commercial community station. Well, it's been a continual parade of programmers coming in, being around for a while and leaving. And some people stayed a long time, and some people didn't. And there's been people who stayed in the office and were part of the crew that ran the station for several decades or more. And again, people came and people would come and go, move away, and come back and pick up a spot on the air again.
Did you have a chance to interact with other programmers very often?
Oh, there were station events, and one of the things KOPN used to do is sponsor concerts in town. So there would be most of the KOPN people would attend the concerts and sometimes work at them, and so quite a variety of different kinds of music that we brought into town. Wasn't always folk music, wasn't always bluegrass, wasn't always country, wasn't always, sometimes it was more R&B and soul and gospel.
So KOPN started mostly as a music station, or 100% as a
Well, it
music
was,
station?
I think that there were some people who were interested in doing some kinds of talk thing and presenting I can't say for sure because I wasn't in a position to listen to what we had on the air, but I know there were people that were doing talk kind of things, and there were some people that, I'd have to look at a program schedule from the different years to actually remember what some of the things were.
How did you do with the weather coming in at the middle of the night all year round? Did you have trouble? Was there problems that the station had to deal with weather?
Well, that's always an issue when we rarely shut down because of the weather. There were nights that there was usually somebody ahead of me, so I rarely had to turn the station on. So there was a show that was in front of mine, so I would come in before the previous show was over and kind of make preparations for the transition. And I did have a daytime show from 1989 through 96. And it was because there was, I don't know if you know who David Mars is. David was on the air, but he was, for 20 years or so, he was Columbia's kind of liaison for energy efficiency things like having an energy efficient home and using various resources. He would come out and look at your house and examine it, and he did shows on KOPN that related to that. He did talk things, and he had also been an entrepreneur in Columbia of several different coffee house live music things, event places that had been open. He had run several of them. He'd been involved in that. So he was involved in not so much music on KOPN, but in KOPN's talk programming, and different kinds of talk things. And he had a number of very interesting shows,
So you were on daytime because of him, or?
He had talked to somebody that was, in 1989, had talked to somebody that said that you should get me to do a daytime music show. And I was coming in, I was living out over in Montauk County, out in Happy Hollow in Montauk County, from starting in 1982. I didn't even live in Columbia again until 2003. But I was Columbia was still kind of a base of operations for me. I continued to do radio shows in Columbia, and I continued to teach guitar and play gigs in Columbia, or around Columbia, through the years that I didn't live in Columbia. So Columbia was kind of a place that, so I was teaching from 1983 on crazy music. And so I would schedule my lessons at crazy music to coincide with my nighttime radio show. And so David Mars knew that I was coming into town for, to teach and to do my other radio show, and sometimes I'd have a regular gig during the times I was coming into town. So David thought that it would be, that if I had a daytime show, it would be good for me and it would be good for KOPN. So he said, I got set up to do a Thursday morning, 9 to noon radio show. My lessons at Crazy Music started at noon. Mm-hmm. And my radio show was Wednesday night, had been Wednesday night, Thursday morning, but when I started playing, I'd moved it back a day, so that when I started having a regular Wednesday night gig, it was interfering with my ability to get to the station in a comfortable way of the same night. So I moved my show a day back to Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, instead of Wednesday night, Thursday morning. So Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. So I didn't have any lessons at Crazy Music till noon. So I was able to do a 9 to noon show, if I could, I had to leave and go over to the store there. So somebody would have to babysit the last 10 minutes of my show and turn it over to the next show that was, turn it over to whoever was doing the next show. So I started doing a music show in '89. It was mostly folk music. It was more specifically so than either of the other two shows of mine have been. On Radio Omega, my late night show, I played everything from sometimes from Lenny Bruce to the original Carter family. Folk, various kinds of folk music and country music, and it's been all over the place. The focus has been more on folk music than other things, and then somewhere along the line I became more interested in playing new music. There was, KOP, a lot of music was coming into KOPN, so I would, on a weekly basis, pick out some new albums that looked to me like they were going to be good, or interesting, and I would play from them. And after the
Well, we talked to Susan Newstead recently.
You did, yeah.
Susan is a manager for several of those years.
Did you know her in Columbia? So she was Susan John. She was
Right.
John's daughter.
I had met her dad.
Yeah.
More than I knew Susan.
Yeah.
And I met her brother, but briefly. So it was very passing acquaintance.
Hearst John was Bob Dyer's uncle.
Mm-hmm.
So Susan Newstead was a cousin of Bob Dyer's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we learned that. That was kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Kind of explained why Bob Dyer was out on the land. South.
Yeah, right. He was on that land because that was a family land. That was he was able to get permission to build this little cabin out of railroad ties out there, out close to where the Three Creeks come together. Three Creeks area, they're a short walk from his house to where the creeks all merge there.
Did you ever get to have Bob on your show?
Well,
Did you ever get to have Bob Dyer on your show?
no, I don't think I did, because he was not ever going to be a 3 a.m. in Columbia. Also, he left Columbia and moved to Boonville. Moved back to Boonville, which is where he was born and raised, in late 70s, I think. He might have still been living in Columbia when Kathy and Dave ended up becoming his musical partners for many, many years. And the way that came to be is that when I met Bob, he was not a performing musician. He was just a guy who had written some songs, really good songs, and he was a teacher at the university in the English department, and had been a writer, was known as a writer, and a writer of poetry, and as it turned out, several books, and some books too, and so anyway, he would be you'd find him at various events that would happen. A bonfire at the mouth of a cave down on at Three Creeks.
Bear Cave.
Well,
I think we called it Bear Cave as Boy Scouts.
yeah, and so there'd be parties there, and there'd be a fire, and there'd be a cave, and people playing music, and front porches and back porches where people get together and play music, and Bob had never played any place and sung in microphones. And so anyway, I was the one that set them up initially to play something, play out of to play somewhere. There was a place.
Lee, is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet? People, events.
Well, I could talk a little bit more about people that have played live music. When I had a daytime show, I had a different. I sometimes had somebody come up and play live music. Sometimes it would be somebody that was coming into town to play a concert or something somebody that I happened to know. I would say that I know Jack played on my daytime show on occasion. So did Bartholomew Bean, I think. I'm pretty sure he came up sometimes and played. He was one of the regulars on my late.
Talk about Bartholomew. You haven't mentioned him.
Well, he came. It turns out that our paths had crossed before he called me up and to see about getting on KOPN my radio mega show was new. I hadn't been doing it very long, maybe just a month or so when I got a call from him. He'd come up to the station. He had a job that was bringing him to Columbia at that time it would have been Wednesdays or Tuesdays. Maybe it was Tuesday nights. By then it was '86. I would have been doing Tuesday nights then. I hadn't started the regular Wednesday night Gladstone gigs till 76. So I'm talking not 86, 76.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd come up to the station and wondered if there was any opportunity to play live, and somebody suggested that he call me and talk to me about it because I had live music on my late night radio show.
Mm-hmm.
So he called and I talked to him about playing, talked to him about it, and I was, just in terms of a quality control notion, I wasn't really very interested in having somebody come up whose music I didn't know what it sounded like or anything like that. The one and only time I ever did that, I ended up with somebody that sounded like Wolfman Jack, playing and singing, sounding with a voice that sounded like Wolfman Jack's, so which was interesting enough, but it wasn't what I was expecting. So anyway, usually I was anybody that was having come up and give them a bunch of airtime. I knew that they played music that I thought was well played, and interesting and worth reaching a larger audience. So I talked to him, and we had a very long conversation on the phone, and he just sounded right. It just sounded there's something about his conversation just sounded like it was going to be all right. That I wouldn't it wouldn't be much of a gamble if I put him on the air to play. So he came up, and I think the second hour of my show, I introduced him. He set him up with a mic, and we got played a few notes to get a sound level on it, and then he started playing his songs, and it turned out that The songs were really interesting. He had his own way of playing guitar. He didn't play like anybody else that I'd ever seen or heard before. He had his own way of playing guitar, and the songs were totally originally not like anybody else's songs. And his way of singing was different. It was stylized a certain way that was not like anybody else I'd ever heard. And also the songs were, as good as the songs were, I was still able to hear them and figure out how to play along with them. But the second time they came around, so I started playing. So I just started to turn my mic on and started playing along with them. And so we ended up playing a couple hours together. And then he was coming back to town, well, it was a while before he came back again. But, well, my timetable is skewed here. Anything I'm going to say here is probably, I could be in the wrong decade. Because, but anyway, that was the start of it. There was a period of time when I didn't see him for a long time. And I think at that time the first time he played on my show, he was Ron Morris and not Bartholomew Bean. I don't think he had taken that stage name yet.
Okay. So Ron Morris.
So I still know him. My first reflex is to say Ronnie, or call him Ronnie. I asked him if he ever used to be called Ronnie when he was a kid, and I don't remember what his answer was. So a lot of people in Columbia knew him as Ron Morris for years before.
Well, good. Glad we got that in.
Yeah, well, so then anyway, I didn't see him for a while, and it was a couple of years later that he started coming into town and playing at the Shea Coffee House every on the night that he was coming in, he had a regular time, and then there was a young woman named Mary Lou Williams, who was sharing the night with him. So they were both playing on that night, and he was coming. So anyway, so maybe a year or two after he'd played on my radio show that one time, I went up to the Shea. I would check in the Shea. I would go by, every week or so and see what was going on there and see if there was if anybody was scheduled to play as a concert rather than just the open mic nights. And there was a whole handmade little flyer, in kind of a window area before you go into the Shea, before you get to the door into the actual coffee house part of it there. And it said a bean, a human being. And then it was said Bartholomew Bean. And then there was a list of then it was kind of an artsy craftsy thing. He's a skilled graphic artist. He's good at drawing and painting and things. He's got lots of different skills actually. Anything from fixing cars to carpentry and keeping old cars running for years past the point where they should still be on the road. He's good at that. So anyway, so then there was a list of some songs, and I thought, wait a minute, I've heard those songs before. Those are familiar song titles. I thought, Bartholomew Bean is Ron Morris. And so I went up to see him play. I came up, went in to see the night that he was playing there with Mary Lou Williams. And sure enough, it was him. And then he was coming into town every week. On the same night, he was a courier for somebody. He was picking up stuff at some place in town, and bringing some stuff down from Performance and taking it back up to some place, from a bank or some business or so. It was just a job. It only took him, besides the drive, maybe an hour of his time there, and then he had a couple hours free to go up and play. So he was coming in on a regular basis.
And you introduced him to Kathy and Dave? Was that
No, they would have been they would have probably, they would have been regulars at the Shea at the time, so they probably met him then. But so back to Bob Dyer. So anyway, I set him up for his first performance at this
that's
place
the
on.
connection, right? Bob was your.
Yeah, Bob was the connection, and so that was the first time Bob had played his first public performance. I remember at the end of it, I said. So after it was all over, everybody thought his music was great in the songs, and I played along with him. I was his accompanist. He felt not confident about his own guitar playing. Actually, it was rock solid rhythm guitar player, and so anyway, I played with him. I said, so you probably won't believe this, but at the end of the night, I said, he got a good ovation, after his set was over. So you may find this hard to believe, but this has been Bob's first gig, first time he's ever sung. So he still remained pretty shy about it. So I ended up I set up a thing I set him up to come and play so we'd play a gig together at the Shea, maybe a year or two later, and so it was going to be an annual thing. You were going to do this every, and so by this time Kathy and Dave were regulars at the Shea. So I set it up to where we'd charge $1 at the door, and Bob and I would do a concert. I think maybe I had done it solo a couple times. I'd gone in there and done a solo. So I thought I'd rather do this bring Bob in there and do it with Bob and showcase Bob and be his accompanist rather than, I get to play in front of people all the time. I'm not as hungry for a mic. And Bob wasn't hungry for a mic either. But so anyway, I brought him in there and he played, and they were just, the musicians that were there, Kathy and Dave both were, and other musicians that were there, friends of Bob, and we got a good turnout and for that, and they were just blown away by the songs, and they immediately wanted to learn these songs and add them to their own repertoires, and which they did, and then they ended up. Bob ended up moving back to Boonville from Columbia, and then Kathy and Dave ended up finishing at the university and taking a job, at the journalism school. He got a degree and took a job at the newspaper in Boonville, and so there's Kathy and Dave and Bob all living in Boonville, so they became his regular accompanists, and they became a performing trio whenever they had the opportunity to. And so it was so they ended up being much more engaged with Bob's music than I ever had the chance to be. And So anyway, I had a hand in getting Bob out of the closet and into the performing artist category.
The world is happy you did.
Well, I'm happy I did. Gave me the opportunity to hear all those songs and be friends with him. He was a very interesting man on many levels, and he seemed to like my music too.
So you had some other memories from KOPN that you would
Well,
like to
other
get
people that
recorded?
came up and played. Well, Steve Hutchison died in 1981. I'm pretty sure it was in the spring of 1981. So he wasn't part of. He was whatever he was involved with. Whoever he was playing with would have been my best shots at people to play with in Jerome. So I think I wasn't able to find people as often to come up and play on my show. I still have all the reel-to-reel recordings. I could probably go through the notebook I've got that's got a lot of that indexed, and just see what I've got from my Radio Omega shows, live music on the Radio Omega, reel-to-reels. There may be some that still aren't cataloged or indexed. I must say that I always was more nervous during a daytime show than I have been at night, just because things happen, and when you're on the air, and if you got some kind of a glitch at night, a small glitch, the small glitch in the daytime, it doesn't matter too much, but you know that what's going over the air is on in the office. And every part of the office, people are listening to it, and it's on out in the other rooms. And so one of the more curious things the only time I really ran into one time where I played something that I shouldn't have, somebody had come in and done a little talk thing right before my show on Thursday morning, and there was somebody that was kind of somebody was doing some kind of a new age somebody had come up and was talking about some plants and plants being conscious, having consciousness, and it was pretty interesting and all, but I don't feel like I wasn't cynical about it, but I thought, well, I think there's something there, but I'm not sure that all of this that I just heard was fully reality, I'm not sure this is real or not. And so at some point, while this person, I think it was a young woman, was talking about this, I remembered a song, a Frank Zappa song. It had this call any vegetable, and that vegetable will respond to you, or something like that. It was just kind of a parody of this sort of a parody of a certain kind of an attitude, sometimes which is overstated. Some people have gone over the top with lots of different things, like starting wars.
Did you get in
So
trouble for
anyway, well, I ended up playing that. So I ended up playing that song, and everything was fine there. But then I didn't cut it. So right after this person was done, I played the Frank Zappa song, and then I hadn't even thought about. I said, I'll just let it roll for another song, and then I'll go to something else. And the next song was something that did not measure up to our standards for what was allowable words to sing or say on the air in the daytime. We had some discretion at night. We could do a disclaimer, and so there's this other thing came on, and I thought, oh, I could be in trouble. And 30 seconds later, somebody from the office was in there chastising me for having played that, whatever it was. That was after call any vegetable. tune the thing from Frank Zappa that I'd played. The next thing had not measured up to FCC standards for what was allowable by KOPN's office judgment. So I don't know. I just or if I goof up at night and miscue something, it's not so big a deal. But there's not very many people actually listening to my show at night. There may be more than I know, but still not that many. But in the daytime, it's prime time. It's 11:15 in the morning. We've got a good audience, and so if I miscue something or some major technological glitch that's my fault, somebody that's in a position of authority over me, even if it's not exercised in any harsh way, will know about it. So anyway, I got 7 years of doing a daytime show, and I enjoyed it, and I got to do a lot of good things and a lot to promote. Had different people come up, and this guy named Jim Scott, who's a great great guitarist and a great songwriter, very much in the new age. He's actually he's got a music degree, and he's trained as a jazz musician. Used to play with the Paul Winter Consort, and but he's a songwriter, and he was coming through Columbia on a regular basis and playing concerts here and there. And so I had him come up. He even probably played shows for KOPN, But he came up to promote a show that he was doing that night or the next night or something like that. Came up on my show to play a few songs, and so he played on my show. There were other people that came up and played. I don't know, a lot of it, I probably got dozens. When Bartholomew Bean was in town every week, I've probably got a couple dozens of shows that I did with him. We got to where we almost burned ourselves out on it, I think, I think there might even been one. There might have even been an evening a night when we both fell asleep at the mic, briefly. So I think after that moment happened, I said, I reintroduced us as the fabulous Snore Brothers, or just the Snore Brothers, instead of the Bean Brothers, Bartholomew and Red Bean and Bartholomew Bean, the Bean Brothers, which is sometimes.
Well, Lee, I know why they call you a legend. So we're going to say, can we put a semicolon here, and we'll come back and visit you some more at another time as the times allow.
Well, I can't promise that I'll still be alive, but
all right, that's what I mean. But it's been.
I've got prospects.
It's been fascinating
for being around for a while.
Fascinating to hear the stories, and I know you've got more, but we don't have time for more right now. So we're going to say thanks, Lee Ruth, for all you've done for KOPN and continue to do.
Well, yeah, I think I'm closing in on the end of it.
Well,
I don't see how I'm going to be good for. I was thinking, that 50-year mark might be a good spot to. I don't have the same energy and enthusiasm for coming up here at 3 in the morning and doing a radio show that I once had. And
well, with a show called Radio Omega, it could just be any night, and that would be the last show.
Yeah, well, it certainly would be true if I never did another one, unless somebody else decided to use the show name. I lost track of the guy that wrote the song. He ended up with a, you know, with a very strange career.
And Lee, we're going to
You-
make that.
If you, I hope you stop recording. Well, I really don't know if I want to go there publicly. You know, I would tell it to you, but I don't think I would want to put it out as a.
Okay, folks, you're not going to get to listen to the rest of the story. This is going to be.
If this is still being recorded, that's true. I thought he might have already shut it down.
Okay, thanks.
What's a good tune to do now?